window.
No worries, no worries. All right, it looks like we are live now. My name is Aaron Davis. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. This is the Unemployment series. Today, I have with me Emma, and she has a great community that she's been working with recently. I'll allow her to introduce herself, and then we'll get right into it because I know she has a busy schedule. So, Emma, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Erin. My name is Emma Willinger. I'm from New York. I had an interesting career background, worked in the environmental space, in manufacturing as a program manager. Now I work in different area of tech as a program manager, but I had left a job about 2 years, 2.5 years ago now, but I ended up taking a risk to take a different role, and I was unemployed for about 10 months, which definitely is hard in the current job market. I didn't expect to be unemployed that long. And in that time, I started a community called Fun Employed and Friends here in New York City, where I bring together folks who are either unemployed or in career transition, just figuring out, or really anyone can come to my events, but like making an open space for people with shared career experiences to talk and feel less alone. um, as so many people are unfortunately in these experiences, it's good to kind of normalize it, unfortunately, but bring people together to meet and connect, share resources, so on.
Well, thank you. That's great, and I appreciate you mentioning your community. I think that's a great thing to have, and that's what I'm hopefully trying to build here. So I really wanted to get into kind of how you started Fun Employment Community, and tell me about what really sparked your interest in trying to get people together and so forth as people who are job seekers. And I know there's a lot of people right now who are just in the job market, feeling the grind and the hustle and bustle of trying to get new employment. But can you give me a little bit of your backstory as to how you got things started there?
Yeah. Yeah, so I was living in California for a few years. Then I took a role that I was on short term working in East Africa. Then I came back to New York, the suburbs, and as I was looking for a role, I started to going to more networking events in the city here, and I found this cool community space in New York called, and they're in Chicago, called Fabric, but with a K. And I decided to join their community. And one of the benefits of being part of the community is you can host an event a month, which makes it super accessible to bring people together. I've always been someone who, would throw events in college, bring people together. And when I got this kind of membership, I was like, oh, who should I host a community for? I'm like, I'm unemployed. I know what it's like. I feel, how isolating it can be, family members are only asking me about my job, how's the search going? It kind of became a big part of my identity, even though my career, when I compared to other things in my life, aren't, the biggest thing. So, but being unemployed, because it was like, was in kind of survival mode, like it really became more, took over my life. But in starting this community, I think, community helps in in any time of hardship, other things we go through in life, finding community, people who understand. So I've been through other things where community has helped, and I was like, you know what, why not, being unemployed. And so I started out hosting potlucks, because I was unemployed at the time. I was like, I don't have much money to throw events, but at least I pay a membership for the space. So I would bring people together at potlucks, and that just creates a warm environment. Everyone's contributing something. It brought out a lot of great people, and immediately there was interest. I shared the event in the community we went through called Rise, and so I had a few people come through that, posted on Luma, the event page, and people started coming. And it just was good energy, and people, I just want people to feel a little bit better after they left, of like, now I met someone else in a similar shoes. I have people at the events, I ask people to raise their hand, like, are you unemployed? Are you underemployed? Are you figuring out, and just even like having people see like, look, I'm unemployed over here. Like, I think even that can make a small impact. I didn't make the community as like a space to give advice because I felt at the time so many people were giving me advice, even unsolicited ways, that I was like, I don't want that just to be like, I don't want to be the person giving advice because the job search is so hard and things that work for one person might not work. So I was like, this is kind of like an unofficial support group in person for people who are unemployed. So it's been a cool experience, and I've shaped it. I've started the community in November of 2024. So I've now had the community for a year and a few months, and I'm going to have my 15th event. So it's cool to grow and shape and meet new people, have people come back, and I've done different events over the course of the last year as well.
Well, that's great, and I think a lot of people really need, that support group type of environment to kind of share knowledge and experience from one another. And I know being unemployed to a certain extent, there's always going to be people who care about you in your environment, giving you unsolicited advice, maybe even solicited advice if you're asking for it, and a lot of times it can be overwhelming to an extent, when you're trying to parse through, is this good advice? Is this bad advice? Is this relatable to, is this relevant to what I'm dealing with? And everybody, I think, has a little bit of a different nuance, so to speak, to their own journey as far as when, the unemployment landscape. And that kind of brings me to my next question is, when it comes to the people in your community, do you notice any kind of common themes or commonalities between the people outside of just simply, being unemployed? Or is there a certain industry maybe that people are coming from, or do you notice any type of similar, nuances that a lot of people are dealing with in that same vein as it relates to their current unemployment struggle? Can you give any idea about that?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, being in New York City, we definitely get a diverse group of people, probably more so people in the tech space, and that could be skewed by, where I'm posting the event, the types of people that come to events. So, a lot of people in the tech space, definitely more like recent layoffs. I know someone I met as well who just hosts events for people who have gone through layoffs, usually from tech companies in New York City. So that's obviously, been something that's happening for a while, but even more recently. And she gets, hundreds of people just coming from the layoff standpoint. So I definitely have people coming from the layoffs. But honestly, I even have some people that, long term, 1 year of unemployment, or people like me where, maybe they took a different job, and maybe it wasn't their intended job, but they're still figuring things out and want to connect with people who are also kind of figuring things out. So a lot of people who are like in between or career transition, who might not be happy with their current role and are just wanting to kind of like learn what else is out there for me. Is this a time you can transition? So yeah, a lot of people just, wanting to just connect in person. I obviously think like, yeah, in our remote world now, we're just lacking with that human connection. So people, just want to come out and relate with one another.
Absolutely. No, I think there's, and I've spoken about this before. I think there's a lot of value in being able to network with other people, whether that's, with others who are employed or unemployed, just making those connections so that you can stay in touch with people. You never know who you might meet type of situation. And so keeping your mind open to new opportunities and new people into your own personal network, I think is something I think is highly valuable in this current landscape, because you never know who you might meet. And somebody might have a connection to somebody who does have a connection that relates to your industry or relates to something that you've already done in the past and you might have experience in. So being able to have those connections, I think, is highly valuable in this current market. But when it came to your own particular journey, after you were unemployed for several months, can you tell me about your own personal experience and kind of what moved the needle for you? I know everybody has their own, specific advice or type of nuance when it comes to their unemployment journey and what worked and what didn't work. Do you have any type of thoughts on what kind of moved the needle for you once you were in that unemployment space and you were really looking hard?
Yeah. Yeah, I think being adaptable for me, I think I was set like with what I wanted for a while, not compromising. And, I ended up kind of opening my becoming more open to other job opportunities. And but also like what helps me is like making sure people knew that I was looking. And since I made posts, on LinkedIn about my community, everyone or my good friends knew I was unemployed, so old coworker of mine referred me to a job that I currently work. Um, that she knew they were hiring, not a job that might be posted on a virtual job board. So having that connection and knowing, my background and what I bring to the table was really helpful. So I think kind of my advice and what someone at my last event said, well, just, making sure people know you're looking, people in your network, friends, family, you might not have to like ask them directly, like, hey, can you find me a job? Just like, you know, keep, saying it, but obviously not like, to a reasonable amount, just so they know you're looking. Even, I had a family member reach out to me saying, oh, like, look at this job opportunity if you happen to be looking. And I'm like, that helps to have people on your mind in your corner to say, like, here's something I found. So, yeah, so I would guess saying like being open and communicating to people where you're at. I've I've met people at my community that didn't want to communicate to their family they were unemployed, so they kept it to themselves for a while. And I understand it's hard, and different cultural differences, family dynamics, people, might not want to share it, but with whoever you can share it with, I think it helps to have people in your corner.
Absolutely. I certainly agree with that. And, having somebody in your corner, and it's tough, when you're, um, especially when you're somebody who's, a provider in your family or somebody who, other people rely on. It's tough to be in that vulnerable space to say, hey, I need some help or this is what I'm dealing with. Whether regardless of who it might be, friends, family, it's always tough to, put yourself in that space to say, hey, I could use a good word for me if you could put that in for me or whatever it may be. So from that standpoint, I can certainly relate, and that's why I wanted to create this particular space here so people can feel comfortable, speaking about it, feeling open to talk about it. Not necessarily in a negative way, because it's easy to get angry or it's easy to, feel frustration in this process because it is, it's a full-time job looking for a job, and so a lot of people have to really, buckle down and concentrate on it. And so being able to feel vulnerable in that space and, put yourself out there to an extent is tough to somebody who's dealing with it, especially for a long-term period. So from that standpoint, when it comes to your community, are there a lot of people who are more long-term unemployed, or is it a lot of people fresh off of a recent type of layoff? Do you see a good mix of everybody kind of in there? What has your experience been from the time that people have seen on the particular job market when it comes to people in your community?
Yeah, I've seen people, with similar time frames to what I had of like 10 months to a year. I think, there's a good chunk of those longer term, or, someone had taught me the term underemployed. They might have some part-time jobs, but they're looking for something that's full time. So I've had, yeah, a good amount of people in that longer time frame. And then, yeah, I get people here and there just got laid off, want to come to an event and find something. Um, but yeah, really, unfortunately, more people in the, maybe 6 months and longer. And unfortunately, it's becoming more and more common. I think in my experience, I'd only been, unemployed for the first few months after graduating college and then finding a job. So this was a completely new experience for me that I didn't expect. And, it can be embarrassing at times, depending. And I think, like, just for me, like, normalizing and saying, like, it doesn't reflect who I am, my accomplishments, and I'm an accomplished person. That doesn't mean anything. Like, now, no matter your experience, no matter the companies on your resume, like, and what you bring to the table, you could be unemployed. Nothing is secure, which is unfortunate. And I think people would always say to me, or like common misconceptions, oh, like, we're looking at my resume, they're like, oh, you worked at Tesla, like that should be easy to find certain jobs. All these assumptions and things that maybe could have helped years ago, but now it's like, no, everyone is unemployed, or like so it's hard out there. And yeah, I see people from different industries, different circumstances. A lot of people in New York, move here. One woman moved here and had a job offer and then lost it right in her first week here. Yeah, so a lot of people like coming to New York City, with all the opportunities, and then something sets them back. So,
I can't imagine that. I've heard of those stories of people getting job offers and even signing job offers and being either ghosted or having them rescinded for whatever reason. And I'm like, why go through the process of getting someone's hopes up or putting them through the interview process if you're unsure about that. So, I think to a certain extent, the hiring process itself has a little bit of a crisis within itself. You know what I mean? Whether it's on the hiring manager side or recruiter side or the job seeker side, I think there's both dynamics that are very valid that have created this. I don't know what the best way to describe it is, but it almost creates this an adversarial process in which it's almost like we're trying to compete against one another for a position where it should be easier for us to connect and hopefully find out if it's a good fit. And for a lot of people, I think they're struggling, whether it's with AI or with just the simple volume of the number of resumes coming in and the number of people that are currently on the job market and the finite number of jobs available. So when it comes to stuff like that, do you have an opinion on what organizations could do or what job seekers could do to kind of ease that process? I know from a job seeker standpoint, my thinking is you should be a lot more calculated with the jobs that you apply for. And and while I recognize that's easier said than done, especially once you've been in the market for several months, it's a little more difficult to say, okay, I can't just be picky right now. I gotta cast a wide net. And to an extent, I recognize from the recruiter side, like, hey, if you're getting hundreds of emails and hundreds of resumes for one position that you have available, I can imagine just from a sheer overwhelming standpoint, it's probably madness trying to source through those and see who's a really genuine good fit and what else is just people using AI to blast out the resume to as many resume companies as possible. So from that standpoint, do you have any opinions on where you see, the easiest way we could possibly, create that additional, close that gap between the two and hopefully, make it easier for one to ideally find that right position?
yeah, no, this is a good question. It definitely makes me think about, yeah, yeah, how could we help each other, assuming, like when I was unemployed, how I could help other unemployed folks. And yeah, what you're saying about being intentional, I think that's still important in any search of, you know, would you hire yourself, when you're applying for the job, you know, of being like some or balancing realism and optimism of like, knowing like not always do they need all the requirements, but I like what you said that, being aware of just applying to things just to apply to them. I think, yeah, I think playing a numbers game is a bit hard nowadays because how people are getting jobs, from what I hear in my experience, is a lot of network wise. So, but that again, that's not the only way. So I don't want to say that's the only way. But yeah, I think we could be mindful of how we apply and who we reach out to, because I think it's very common, to reach out on LinkedIn to people that you applied to the job for, or reach out to connections. But really, when people reach out, being specific of like what help is needed or what do you want to talk about. So because if you're on the receiving end of all those messages, people might want to help. But if, they have to dig through all these messages and try to decipher what you want and need, they just might, have paralysis at all the messages and be like, I'm not replying to anyone. And then kind of everyone gets, hurt in that situation when you're trying to build a network. So yeah, being smart about what you ask people for, and how, and kind of telling them how they can help you if they're a friend or someone in your network. When it comes to network, the people who helped me the most or kind of like had me on the radar, some were people I had just met. One person, I was volunteering at a food pantry, and I talked to her once and she was like super friendly. She's like, oh, I'm going to keep you in mind. And she sent me some names. So sometimes it was really like surprising people who helped, and people I reached out to. We either worked at Tesla previously or went to the same university. Some of those folks, because we have that common shared experience, they were more apt to kind of look out for me. So I guess now I'm kind of segueing into another kind of topic, but yeah, just being smart and intentional and direct with how you communicate with people and applying to jobs that way as well. I think that will just improve the whole conversation. And I don't want there to be that perception of unemployed people that we just ask for stuff, because some people have that view of like, oh, they meet someone at a networking event and they're unemployed, and then they're just assume they're going to ask for something. But that's not the case. Like, people want to build relationships, and we should focus on building those relationships. And if something happens down the line, maybe, but
No,
try and
I definitely. I've had that experience also, to where you get into a room, whether it's a networking event or just a social event, and whether somebody knows you're unemployed or not, you kind of get into one of those realms where it's like, okay, is this person just looking for a handout? I can't just give them a job. But it's like, no, I just I really want to know more about what you do, what your organization is about. If there's an opportunity for you to put in a good word, great, but that's not exactly what I'm looking for. A lot of times, uh, we need to do our own type of due diligence to see if this is an organization we want to work for.
yeah,
And, that's really important as well. You can't just, feel like, okay, I'm unemployed, I'll take the first thing I can get, which I know that's easy to kind of latch on to, especially when you've been unemployed for a long time. But, is that really the best decision you make if you want to, remain somewhere for longevity? And that's a lot of what people, I think, forget about in the current market. But all that to say is, I think it reiterates the common thing that we've been talking about, which is building out a network, building out connections, meeting people, and making genuine connections with people, so that you can hopefully, like I said, you never know who you might meet. So one connection can lead to another, can lead to another job opportunity. So that's the way I kind of look at it, and I try to keep my mind open about everybody I come across and everybody I might meet. And if I feel like I want to disclose, like, hey, this is an opportunity that I might be interested in. If you want to put in a good word for me, or I can email you my resume, whatever it might be to help make that connection, or take a business card, all those types of things. Just connecting with people and making those, building your network internally, so that you can have those connections when whatever position might come up available. Hopefully, they'll keep you top of mind.
Yeah.
With that, I want to respect your time, so I'll leave you with this one last question I like to ask everybody. Is what is the one thing that you would recommend to somebody who's currently in the job market, when it comes to, what is the one piece of advice that you would really have someone latch on to, keep it positive, and keep them encouraged to keep moving?
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. I would say I kind of mentioned this earlier, but to try as best as you can to not make being unemployed your whole personality. And again, obviously, like I still said, like, communicate to people where you're at so they can potentially help if they know of something. But, it kind of dragged me down in other ways in life because I think it's also like it could be a personal thing and society's perception of someone when they're looking for a job of like, as I mentioned, like family and friends. Like, first question when some people saw me wasn't like, how are you doing? Or like, what are you up to? It was like, how's the job search going? And so I would have get into the job search immediately. And then, even when people started asking me, how am I doing? I would sometimes just immediately reply with like, "Oh, the job search is blah, but like blah, yada yada yada." And I think, from those forces, internal and external, it became more than it needed to be, and I kind of forgot. I was doing other things while I was unemployed. I was volunteering, I was spending more time going to the gym, building this community, and as it went on in my unemployment, I got better at being like, I need to share my positive wins with people. Like, I need to share that I built this community and now I've hosted like 15 events and I just need to broadcast that out to the world so people know, my wins and what else is going on in my life. And that's just something that kind of like translated from learning in that unemployment period to now as I'm working of just share those wins, share what's going on in my life, and remind yourself that you're more than just your job, you're more than your unemployment. And I've hosted events where like that kind of was the topic. I've done now 2 show and tell events where I get people to share something non-work related that they're excited about. So at my last event, it was cool. Like, a friend of mine played sax that he just had learned, and some folks from Kazakhstan came and they shared about their culture and their food. Someone shared about, tarot cards, food, you know, I don't even know what I shared about, like what outfit I was wearing and where I got everything. So it was just like a fun, positive environment that kind of, was uplifting. And I think just changing the way we ask people questions or share things about ourselves. That's something I learned throughout my unemployment. I wish I did from the start, so it didn't kind of become, more than it needed to be. And obviously, it's career is sustenance, and it's hard to be without it. But changing how you frame things helped me, and that's one thing I want to share here and with my community as I meet more people. So yeah.
Well, I think that's a great way to end things, and I certainly would be open to staying in touch. I'd be, it's given me a lot of ideas. I might like to create something similar here in the Texas area where I'm at. So we can continue to spread out that positive type of energy in an environment where people can socialize, but also make connections and build networks in a positive way. I think that's really encouraging. So I really appreciate your time, Emma. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And I hope you keep the community going. I think that's such a positive thing. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Thanks for making this podcast. I think it's great to have more facets where we share about unemployment. And then, yeah, the space that we met in Rise is a great community for people who are unemployed. And then, yeah, I'm happy to talk about running events. So, I've had people reach out, a friend of mine who wants to give me advice on running my events and, maybe expand in the future. So I'm happy to give you advice because definitely these type of events help and just spreading the conversation. So appreciate
I
it.
appreciate that. Absolutely. Well, you have a good afternoon. I'll let you get back to whatever you've got going on for the days. But it's been a pleasure, and I'll let you go.
Thank you so much, Aaron.
Have a
Thanks for
great
having
one.
me. Take care. Bye.